We're happy to have with us Tim Semro. He's a board-certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law. He's licensed to practice in Ohio, Michigan, and Arizona, and he's the go-to guy to solve your complex estate planning issues. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Oh, thanks for having me.
In plain English, what does a specialist in estate planning actually do?
The specialist thing came into play probably about 10 years ago, where the Ohio Bar Association decided they wanted to have a designation that would show the public that we, as attorneys, limit our practice to a certain area, and that, you know, we take extra classes in that area. We had to take an exam to get this designation, and you have to be in practice for a certain amount of years before they'll even let you take the exam. So it's just a way to say to the public, this person practices in this area exclusively, and also we're held to a higher standard as a result.
When we talk about board certification, can you explain the extra criteria? And how many people actually have that certification of all the attorneys in Ohio? I think it's a pretty small number.
It is a small number. In fact, I think in Toledo it's under 10 attorneys that have gone and gotten that designation. So because it's difficult. I mean, you have to be in practice for 5 years, and then there's an exam that you have to take that covers estate planning, probate, and trust questions. And then every year after that, we have to take advanced continuing education, not just the regular continuing ed. So, and then every 5 years, I think it is, we have to recertify and go through a whole process for that. So again, it's a good way for us to stay up on things, but also let the public know that, we should know what we're talking about.
I'm assuming that any attorney can claim to be an estate planning attorney, but somebody with your certification is really unique. So who would be your ideal client?
This was something we thought about a lot when we set our firm up, is we didn't want to close the door to any client. So we have a system set up where we really can handle any client from, the first go around when people have a child and they think, oh my goodness, I have to get a guardian named, or to, end of life situations or more complex planning. So we really can handle any level of planning. And the cool thing about estate planning, I like to tell people, is we're dealing with death and taxes. So it's going to affect everyone. Everyone needs a will, is what we like to say. So to start out with, you really have to have some estate planning no matter where you are in life.
I noticed you have a unique selling proposition, that you're an author of a book called Your Money, Your Way. Why did you write it, and who should read it?
Yeah, so I got this idea to write the book because a lot of the clients, what we were finding is people are often hesitant to come in and meet with an attorney. And what I wanted to show them is that it's not a scary proposition to come in and meet with the attorney and have a conversation. There's a lot of books out there that say this is, estate planning for dummies, or here's what the documents you need, and they're actually quite boring. So what we did here is I went through and I took client stories. Now, they're not real client stories because I didn't want to expose any confidences, but based on client stories, I wrote 5 stories covering pretty much the typical situations so that we see, and it's a very quick read. I set it up so that ideally you could get it done in 90 minutes to 2 hours. And you have a really good idea of what estate planning is. And then at the end of each chapter, there's some cues that say, well, here's what the documents are that we talked about in this chapter, and here's why they're important, to kind of lead them into having that conversation with an attorney and not hesitate to call.
So I read your book and I was impressed by it. It seems to me like you really need a lot of personal knowledge of your client to identify their specific goals. So I think I mentioned before this that you almost seem like you have to be a therapist or a psychologist to really be good at your job.
Well, you definitely have to like people because you do have to get to know people and find out lots of things about their life. And we joke around about it in client meetings sometimes because we say, look, you meet us on this first meeting, and within a couple of minutes, we're going to be asking questions about very, private things and detailed things about your family. And what always surprises us is how they just met us within the first hour, and then they go ahead and start telling us these things. And one of my partners said this exact thing to the client. And about halfway through the meeting, she's telling him this story about, a big family problem that's going on. And then all of a sudden she stops and she's like, wait, I'm doing exactly what you said I was going to do. And so somehow we have to build trust in a very short period of time in that first meeting. And so that's kind of where I guess where our specialty is.
What I was impressed with in the book, it seemed like a lot of the clients didn't even understand what they wanted to achieve. And your job was almost to bring them along the way so you helped them identify their problem.
Yeah, oftentimes people will come to us and they'll say, hey, I need a will or I need a trust. And they don't really have any idea what that means. And they may not need complicated planning. They may need complicated planning. So yeah, one of the things we do, and sometimes we'll ask questions ahead of time. We'll have a questionnaire that we have them fill out, but I never want to put a barrier in front of them to get to that first meeting. So if it's just the conversation and they say, look, I don't know where to start, well, let's sit down and have a talk and see where it goes, because oftentimes in just a few questions, we can start narrowing in. And remember, those are just tools, all the different trusts and other things. We have to figure out how to solve the problem, and then we'll use the right tool for that.
Can you give us some examples of some specific types of complex problems that in a given month you might have to deal with?
The one that we see a lot of lately, and, growing up, I don't remember this being a thing, but the special needs trust, we do more of those now than we've ever done. And so we're seeing instances of people with autism and other issues in the family that I don't know if they just were undiagnosed in the past, but we see a lot of that. And so those are complex problems, because you take a situation where the family wants to leave money to this person or give money to this person, but we don't want to disqualify them from government benefits that they might be entitled to. So how do you make those two things jive together? And so special needs planning is a big one. The other one we see is a lot of times families want to help out the next generation or their grandkids, but they don't necessarily want to give them money. And so we've done this thing we call a family bank several times, where they'll set up a family bank and they'll loan money to the grandkids to help them buy a house. We even put a mortgage on the house, which, by the way, protects them, because if we're first in line and they have another creditor come after them, the mortgage is first in line and we'd be able to take that house back. And so it's just some unique things like that. And then I guess the third one I'd say is the family cottage. That we run into that one quite a bit. In fact, there was a book probably 20 years ago that a guy up in Michigan wrote that I thought was fantastic on this. And it's changed a lot on what we can do since he wrote that book. But family cottage situations are always unique. And there's a chapter in the book about it, because oftentimes you'll have a child who wants to use the family cottage quite a bit, another one that sees it as just a gold mine that we should sell this thing, and then you have what do the parents want to see happen. And in the story in the book, we talk about how they're hoping that in the future the family would all get back together at the cottage like they used to when they were young. And estate planning can help, encourage that type of behavior.
So one of the common questions, if you're a lawyer and you're at a party, they'll ask you, do I need a will or do I need a trust? What's the criteria? And I think the average layperson really doesn't know the difference.
Yeah. Well, so I always tell them everybody needs a will. And here's a typical lawyer answer. We tell them, yes, you need a will. And then I'm going to show you how we're not going to use it, because a will goes through probate. And so what I'll often do is I'll draw out on a piece of paper 3 columns. I'll put probate, contract, and operation of law. So these are the only 3 ways you can pass assets when you die. So probate is for stuff that you own individually in your own name with no beneficiary or no co-owner. Contract is stuff like life insurance would be the easiest one to use an example. You pay the premium to the life insurance company. They agree by a contract that if you die, they'll pay a death benefit to the person you name. Probate court has nothing to do with that. But also bank accounts and IRAs and annuities and trusts. Trusts are also contracts. And then the third one is operation of law. So if you own something joint tenancy with right of survivorship, then upon your death, the automatically by operation of law, the other person becomes the owner. Or sometimes we have TOD in certain states like Ohio, where you can TOD your property, and by operation of law, the other person becomes the owner. Now, that first column, probate, is where we want to stay out of. So I want you to have a will, but I don't really want anything in there. I'd rather be in contract area, because creditors have a lot of rights in probate. Probate takes time. It takes a lot of costs to take care of. I also don't like the operation of law, the joint ownership, because if both people die, we're back over into probate. So I try to get everybody in that middle column. So we might be able to set up a will that says, all right, here's our backup plan in case you didn't get your stuff all covered, and then have them do beneficiary designations on everything they own. Well, then we avoided probate and we are in good shape. We might use a trust if it makes sense. And what's the criteria between using a trust or not? This is one that always annoys me, is sometimes you'll hear lawyers will say stuff like, well, unless you have $1 million, you don't need a trust. Well, if you have a couple $100,000 and you've got a special needs child situation, you might definitely need a trust. And if you have $5 million and you're leaving everything to one charity and you don't care how they spend it, and you don't want to put any restrictions, you might not need a trust. So I can paint picture of examples where that doesn't really govern. But overall, you look at it and say, all right, what is their situation? What do they need? And is this the right tool? So sometimes a trust is the right tool for that.
So you have a client, you've done your estate planning with them. I mean, in other occupations, like you go to the dentist twice a year, you take your car in for the regular maintenance. What do you tell a client of, hey, you need to come back to us and change things?
We tell people, hey, we should come in every 2 years at least and just have a conversation. And one of the neat things about how we do our planning is almost all the planning we do is quoted fee work. So if you call me up, we don't charge for phone calls. So we have a phone call or we have a meeting. We just want to know what's going on, because every couple of years is a good cadence of time, because in that period of time, maybe there's another child or grandchild, or maybe somebody passed away. So a family circumstance may have changed. Also, accounts may have changed. You may have gotten a new broker, or you opened some new accounts because you moved and you bought a new house. So the assets may have changed. And then the third thing is, as long as Congress is in session, I've got plenty of work to do. They're constantly making new laws. So if we're checking in every couple of years, we're probably doing good. Do some people wait more like 4 or 5 years? Yeah, but we encourage 2 years as a good cadence for that. And sometimes it's just a quick check-in, and nothing's changed, and that's okay.
How do you deal with the issue where you have children that, 2 of them are very successful, one of them is very unsuccessful, the other one you're concerned is going to get divorced 12 times. And then the parents are worried that if I give different amounts of money, the kids are going to perceive it as, mom loved Herman more than Bill.
Yeah, that's always the difficult one. And this concept, actually, we have a chapter in the book about this. And the concept is fair and equal. Is fair equal? And fair is not always equal. And so you could have situations like you just said, where that one kid's going to need more help. Maybe the other kids don't need the help. Or maybe like in the example in the book, the story was that the one child had contributed to the business quite a bit and kind of built the business with sweat equity, and dividing things equally just wouldn't be fair, is what the client thought. So sometimes you do have to take those into consideration. And that's also where the estate planning can help and we spend a lot of time in what we call asset protection. Because if you've got a child who has issues with creditors, or we've had where the kids are incarcerated, and they may have issues with drugs or things like that, we can kind of guide through that with an estate plan, with a trust, in a way that you just can't with just a simple will.
So in this day and age, where oftentimes people are married 2 or 3 different times and have different sets of kids, I'm assuming that potentially there's a little bit of conflict when you get the husband and wife coming in together.
this is one of the things that I think estate planning in a second marriage situation is really important, because our goal is to not have conflict after the one spouse dies. And that's what the huge risk is either you have the kids of the deceased spouse, they're upset because now they got to wait for this other person to die for them to get their inheritance. And we also want to provide for the surviving spouse. So how do we do that? Those are complicated issues. And we deal with those every day. Sometimes we use life insurance. Sometimes it's just how we are allocating the assets. But how can we try to have them at least not fighting? I'd like them to get along, but at least not fighting. And that's a challenge.
One of the interesting things that I've heard people in your occupation mention to me is they really don't want to name one of their kids as the trustee, because now all the other kids are going to drive them crazy if they don't give the other kids money. So realistically, you're dead and you've put one of your kids in a position so all the other kids hate them. So
Right.
is that why you recommend an outside the family trustee?
And this is the same thing when we were talking about before, is we don't want to put a wedge, like in the second marriage situation. I don't want to put a wedge in the relationship between the siblings. So a lot of times, either because they don't have anyone that they think is good with money, or they don't want to put that responsibility on one of them and force them to be the bad guy, I'll recommend they use an outside trustee. And, for outside trustees, you can use trust companies. There's plenty of great trust companies. You can use lawyers. You can use CPAs as trust companies. And those as trustee, and those are really different depending on the situation and what the family situation is. But a lot of times, and the more trust that we see, when you get through that generation, especially if you get to the next generation after that, if you don't want them to spend all the money and you want it to be used properly, a outside trustee is a great option.
So do you recommend that the parents who create the trust discuss with the kids what's going to go on before they die?
Oh, that's a great question. So sometimes yes. And this is why around the holiday time, I get really busy, because the kids will all be coming in around Thanksgiving or Christmas, and they'll say, can we have a meeting where you sit down and kind of explain to the kids? And we're more than happy to do that. And the meeting will either be where I'm explaining just general estate planning, or I could specifically talk about their documents and say, this is how it's going to be in your situation. And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes they even want me to talk numbers with the kids. That's a pretty rare one, but I've done that as well. But any layer of that where they just want to have that discussion about, hey, understand that estate planning's out there and we've done planning, but not specifically about theirs, or maybe we talk about theirs specifically. We love doing that. And it kind of gets them ready for what that next step is. Now, normally you don't see that until the parents are getting on in age a little bit and they're thinking about that next step, and they've already said, hey, I want, my kids to be a trustee, or, I just want them to know about what's going to happen. But we do those meetings, and I think they're really helpful, because it kind of opens their eyes, and sometimes it opens their eyes to, hey, they need to be doing some planning too, because they start going, wait a second, I've got that same issue, because they might be in their 40s or 50s by that time.
So when you have those meetings, do you normally have all the kids or just the person who's going to be named the trustee?
We've done both. Yeah, I think more often than not, it's all the kids, but we've done it both ways, and sometimes we have one of the kids is here and another one's up on screen because they're, in another part of the country, and we can video conference them in, or we might have 2 or 3 of them on the video call. But yeah, I think it helps for them, especially because one of the things about most of our plans, usually the plans aren't secretive. And so most of the times they're going to be very transparent among the children of what's happening with the assets. So if I can get them all on board of hearing it, they know, hey, there's nothing being hidden there. There's just less chance of conflict and strife, because they realize you're going to get a report of everything in the trust, how it's all divided. So in most cases, that's how it'll be done.
And I'm assuming that your client would rather have you be the potential bad guy and explain it than they're explaining it to their own kid. But have you ever, you probably don't want to talk about it, but have you ever had a position where you explain it and one of the kids explodes and you have a fight?
No, actually, I haven't. But there's a good clip of a comedy TV show that I saw where this happens. They're doing the reading of the. This is another thing is we don't actually read the wills anymore. I mean that's never happened in my career, but a lot of times they'll come in after somebody dies and they expect we're going to sit around the table and read the will. And so there was a comedy show where this happens and they all start blowing up about it. And it's pretty funny, but no, that doesn't really happen in real life. In real life, what would happen is we would probably give them a phone call, let them know that we're involved, and then give them a little breakdown of here's what the trust says. We might meet with them, but it's not the old fashioned Hollywood with the books behind us and we're reading it out. Yeah.
Have you ever had, I see it like in movies where the person who died had a video and they talk and mention each person?
I've not been involved in that. In fact, they discourage that because it comes across really badly, but I've only seen that in movies.
Recently, we've had President Trump's beautiful bill. How is that going to affect your area of the law?
There's been a number of provisions in that bill, and I'm sure everybody's read the whole thing. But yeah, the biggest one is the sunset of all the tax provisions. That's gone. So the main provisions are sticking around. The estate tax, which is where we deal a lot in, that exemption went to $15 million, which means a married couple, $30 million can pass estate tax free, and that's indexed with inflation. But there's a couple other neat ones. The state and local taxes. So if you've got real estate taxes, you were capped at $10,000 of deduction under the old law, and they've increased that to $40,000 now. There are phase outs when you get in the higher income limits, but that relieves some pressure, especially with the rising real estate taxes that we've been seeing. And then the other one is for those people that are age 65 and older. There's a $6,000 deduction that got worked into this bill, and it's only around for a couple of years, but maybe it'll get extended. But that was a nice little addition they put in.
Let's talk about your background, your story. Where did you grow up? What schools did you go to? And how did you decide? I mean, I'm assuming when you were 7 years old, when some kids said they wanted to be a fireman, you didn't say, hey, I want to be an estate planning attorney.
No, actually, at that time, I wanted to be a fireman. So I grew up in Maumee, Ohio, and my dad was a pastor of a church in Maumee. In fact, if you're driving down the Anthony Wayne Trail, if you're from around here, 7th Street, there's a little church there that's now turned into a house. Right across from the Walcott House is those trains the train cars that are sitting there. But I grew up in a pastor's house, so we were under the microscope. We like to say we grew up in the fishbowl because everybody watched everything we would do. And so originally I thought, well, maybe I want to be a pastor. When I got to college, I figured out I didn't want to do that. And then I really took an interest in accounting, and I got an accounting degree. And when I got my accounting degree, I went to Michigan State for that, and I graduated and I started interviewing, and I just didn't like what accountants do for a living. I thought, well, I don't want to do this. So then I went to law school, and at this point, I think my in-laws were thinking, is this guy ever going to get a job? I went to law school, and it just worked together that hardly any attorneys go to law school with an accounting degree. And so it kind of guided me I got into an internship, and I got put into the estate planning department at a law firm and just loved it. I loved the interaction with the people, which was similar to what I always saw my dad do when he was counseling people in the church. So I got to have a lot of interaction. And then I got to pursue, what I was passionate about, which was saving taxes and helping people with their complex problems. So that's kind of how we got to where we are. And here we are back in Toledo. I did make that tour through Michigan State, but we're back in Toledo.
No, that sounds logical. What would be your advice to somebody who actually wants to become an estate planning attorney?
Well, we get this. I have high school and college students probably once or twice a year will shadow at our office, and they'll always ask me about going to law school. And I tell them, look, you really got to like reading, first of all, because you have a lot of reading to do when you're in law school. And then when you get out, proofreading becomes the primary thing that you do a lot of. But I think to be in estate planning, you really have to like people, and you got to have a genuine curiosity about people and what's going on with their lives. And if you have that, then you really have what it takes to succeed in estate planning. it's a unique area of the law, totally different. Like I always tell people, if you're in court and I'm standing next to you, you're in trouble because I don't even know where to stand in court. I don't have the first clue because we don't go to court. The most we do is probate court. And if you do that, most of it's through the mail. And if you are in court, you're really in the judge's office having a talk, usually. So it's a very unique area where we're meeting with people. And that, by the way, is why we do most of our fees as quoted fees, because the people that we deal with as clients, they're not used to dealing with lawyers. They're not corporate, environment where they're used to a billable hour. So they're a lot more comfortable with a quoted fee. But it's a fun area. I really enjoy it.
So when you're coming up with a sophisticated estate plan, my understanding is you actually work with a lot of other professionals as a team. Can you explain what other type of people are you involved with and what your role is and what their role is?
Yeah, and this is really important, I feel, because a lot of attorneys, I think where they make a mistake is they shut these people out of the conversation. We are very closely with the team. So they're financial advisors, they're bankers, they're CPAs. We want to have that team environment. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We all have unique things we bring to the table. The CPAs are going to see things a little differently than we're going to look at it. Financial advisors are looking at it differently. Also, they have different amount of time they've spent with the client. I might meet with the client, do the estate plan. Then, like we said, 2 years later, I sit down with them. That financial advisor is probably sitting down with them every year, maybe more than once a year. So they're going to see issues pop up quicker than I will to bring them to our attention. And then that team atmosphere, it gives them a confidence that we're covering all the bases, because there's so many different issues. Some are financial, but some are family issues that you just don't always see right off the top.
I've noticed that sometimes when a client sees somebody who doesn't really specialize in estate planning, they have this estate plan, but they end up dying. It was never funded. Can you explain the importance of actually funding the estate plan?
Yeah, this is something that concerns us because, everyone can print out a will off the shelf that they might have seen before, but very few attorneys specialize in just the estate planning area. So you're right. The funding becomes a big issue, because if you set up a plan, so earlier when I was talking about the probate and the non-probate, you got to get the beneficiary designations, the ownership correct. And that's something we spend a lot of time on. We give not only written instructions, but we give assistance on the funding. So I've had clients call me. I had one little old lady, and I told her, I said, look, if you're over at the bank and they don't understand what you're talking about, call me right when you're there. And she said she was sitting there and they were getting a little confused on what she wanted, and she just pulled out her cell phone and put it on speaker right there. And that's exactly what I wanted her to do. And they cleared it up for her right away. Because what I don't want to have happen is, she gets frustrated, goes home, and then she's got to go back a different day. So I say, look, give us a call right when you're there, and we'll help them out. Because that funding becomes so important. Because otherwise, if that funding doesn't get done, I could have a beautiful estate plan set up, and we're back in probate. And then I'm dealing with the family, and they're saying, why is this going through probate? Didn't you set up a plan? So it's to all of our benefit for this funding to go well. And so we spend a lot of time with our clients on that.
So you seem to make a big effort to try to educate your clients so then they can work with you as a team. So somebody listening to this, what would be their next step where they realize, hey, I need an estate plan. What do I do next?
This is a great question, because sometimes it's to sit down with the lawyer and talk about your estate plan, but sometimes there's something else that you need to focus on first. And so one of the things, and I've got this as an addition to the book, and people can download it. I'll actually hold this up. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's a scorecard, and we call this the estate plan readiness scorecard. And so what they can do is they can go through this, the different mindsets and the different things that they have to think about, whether it's their documents or whether it's their insurance or whether it's their healthcare powers of attorney or their financial powers of attorney, or if they're worried about taxes with the IRS, or if they're worried about protection from creditors, or do they even have a personal balance sheet and they understand what's in their estate. And they can score themselves on this to say, all right, here's where I fall. And then they can figure out overall, where do they where do they fall in the readiness? Like, do I have an estate plan and do I feel good about it? And they also might be in the instructions we've got with it. They might find one of these columns is really important, and that's where they should start. So we've got that as a free resource. If they go to our website, which is semrohenry.com, there's a tab that says Trust Book. They can download the book. If you don't like a downloaded book and you want a hard copy, also just call the office and we'll give you one. But they can download the scorecard as well, and that gives them a great place to start.
So I really appreciate you educating us about this today. My recommendation to people is that you're much, much better off hiring an attorney that specializes in this area. The amount of money you'll spend is minuscule compared to the advantages of having somebody that really knows what they're doing. And I appreciate you sharing this information with us today, Tim. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.